Hey y'all, so this is video 12 of the report of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, the committee study of the Central Intelligence Agency's detention and interrogation program. Remember, after 9/11, many suspected terrorists were detained for extended periods and tortured, according to this report. I think the evidence is clear. They've got some, even seem like some whistleblowers that were sending messages back and forth to headquarters because of how bad the treatment of these people were. I don't know how you feel about it. I don't necessarily have really an opinion one way or another. I mean, I could see both sides of the coin. After 9/11, we had 3,000 people, well, just rounding up, that had died because of the terrorists hitting the towers and then the Pentagon and all that stuff. And then, I mean, if it was somebody here just in the States that killed somebody, they could very well go to death row and go under the needle, or it used to be old Sparky, like the electric chair. So, anyway, I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying it's necessarily wrong, harsh, not harsh, but sometimes people need punishment. So it's kind of like, I don't know which way to fall with this, but we're just going to read this because it's just interesting information. It kind of goes along with the QBARC thing that I've been doing with the counterintelligence. Now, that was probably back in the 60s, I think, was when that one was written, not wrote. Anyway, so let's go on. So, right here, it says the U.S. military legal advisor concluded that because of al-Najjar's treatment and the concealment of the facility from the ICRC, I think that's like the International Red Cross or something. Military participation in al-Najjar's interrogation would involve risk for the U.S. military. Redacted. The legal advisor recommended briefing the CIA's detention and interrogation activities to U.S. And then it just has redacted. I mean, a lot of redactions. Combatant command to alert the command of the risk prior to the U.S. military being involved in any aspect of the interrogation of al-Najjar. According to the CIA Inspector General, the detention and interrogation of Rita al-Najjar became the model for handling other CIA detainees at detention site Cobalt. The CIA disseminated one intelligence report from its detention and interrogation of Rita al-Najjar. Death of Gul Rahman leads CIA headquarters to learn of unreported coercive interrogation techniques at detention site Cobalt. CIA Inspector General review reveals lack of oversight of the detention center or detention site. In November 2002, Alex Station officers requested that CIA contract interrogator Hammond Barr, one of the two primary interrogators of Abu Zubaydah in August of 2002, traveled to detention site Cobalt to assess a detainee for the possible use of the CIA's enhanced interrogation techniques. While Dunbar was present at detention site Cobalt, he assisted redacted CIA Officer 1 in the interrogations of Gul Rahman, a suspected Islamic extremist. As reported to CIA headquarters, this interrogation included 48 hours of sleep deprivation, auditory overload, total darkness, isolation, a cold shower, and rough treatment. CIA headquarters did not approve these interrogation techniques in advance. Upon receipt of these cables, however, officers at CIA headquarters responded that they were motivated to extract any and all operational information on Al Qaeda and Hezbi Islami. Is that a name? Okay, so anyway, Hezbi Islami from Gul Rahman, and suggested that enhanced measures might be needed to gain Gul Rahman's compliance. CIA headquarters also requested that a psychological assessment of Rahman be completed prior to Dunbar's departure from the detention site on November redacted 2002, a few days before the death of Gul Rahman. Dunbar proposed the use of the CIA's enhanced interrogation techniques on other detainees and offered suggestions to CIA Officer 1, the site manager, on the use of such techniques. On November redacted 2002, CIA Officer 1 ordered that Goldman be shackled to the wall of his cell in a position that required the detainee to rest on the bare concrete floor. Roman was wearing only a sweatshirt. As CIA Officer 1 had ordered that Roman's clothing be removed when he had been judged to be uncooperative during an earlier interrogation. The next day, the guards found Gul Rahman's dead body. An internal CIA review and autopsy assessed that Rahman likely died from hypothermia, in part from having been forced to sit on the bare concrete floor without pants, and then CIA Officer 1's initial cable to CIA headquarters on Rahman's death included a number of misstatements and omissions that were not discovered until internal investigations into Rahman's death. The death of Gul Rahman resulted in increased attention to CIA detention and interrogation activities in country by CIA headquarters. The CTC formally designated the CTC's renditions group as the responsible entity for the management and maintenance of all CIA interrogation facilities, including detention site Cobalt. In early December 2002, despite this change, many of the same individuals with the CIA, including Dunbar, officers at detention site Cobalt, and officers within Alex Station who had recommended the use of the CIA's enhanced interrogation techniques against Gul Rahman, remain key figures in the CIA interrogation program and received no reprimand or sanction for Rahman's death. Instead, in March 2003, just 4 months after the death of Gul Rahman, the CIA station in country recommended that redacted CIA Officer 1 receive a cash reward of $2,500 for his consistently superior work. CIA Officer 1 remained in his position as manager of the detention site until July 2003 and continued to be involved in the interrogations of the other CIA detainees. He was formally certified as a CIA interrogator in April 2003 after the practical portion of his training requirement was waived because of his past experience with the interrogations at detention site Cobalt. And there's a bunch of footnotes there. If you want to look at it, stop it, look at them. I'll put the actual link in the description so you can just pull it up whenever you want. Okay, later investigations of detention site Cobalt conducted by the CIA Inspector General and the Department or Deputy Director of Operations following the death of Gul Rahman found that the use of the CIA's enhanced interrogation techniques and other coercive interrogation techniques was more widespread than was reported in the contemporaneous CIA cables. Specifically, the interrogation techniques that went unreported in CIA cables included standing, sleep deprivation, in which a detainee's arms were shackled above his head, nudity, dietary manipulation, exposure to cold temperatures, cold showers, rough takedowns, and in at least 2 instances, the use of mock executions. On November 18, 2002, staff from the CIA's Office of Inspector General contacted redacted CTC legal and then redacted to indicate their interest in being briefed by CTC on the detention facility in the country. At their meeting with the DDO and the chief of CTC on November redacted 2002, the OIG staff explained that while in that country on a separate matter, the staff had overheard a conversation that included references to war crimes and torture at a CIA detention facility and were therefore seeking to follow up on this information. According to notes from the meeting, the DDO described the most recent event concerning Gul Rahman, his death, which occurred on November redacted 2002. Let's look at this. I don't know. I just want to look at this one. Special review counterterrorism, detention and interrogation activities. And this is September of 2001 to October 2003. May 7th of 2004, memorandum for Deputy Director of Operations from redacted, January 28th, 2003, subject death investigation of Gul Rahman. CIA Inspector General report of investigation, death of a detainee, redacted. And then April 27, 2005, Inspector General records of the interview of CIA debriefer indicating that during the 2 weeks of interrogation training, she heard stories of Cobalt detainees being hung for days on end, not being fed, mock assassinations, and at least one case of a detainee being repeatedly choked. Wow. The senior debriefer also informed the Office of Inspector General that she heard that while at Cobalt, CIA Officer 2 had hung detainees up for long periods with their toes barely touching the ground. Wow. Dunbar described a rough takedown following the death of Gul Rahman at Cobalt. According to Dunbar, there were approximately 5 CIA officers from the renditions team. Each one had a role during the takedown, and it was thoroughly planned and rehearsed. They opened the door of Rahman's cell and rushed in, screaming and yelling for him to get down. They dragged him outside, cut off his clothes, and secured him with mylar tape. They covered his head with a hood and ran him up and down a long corridor adjacent to his cell. They slapped him and punched him several times. Dunbar stated that although it was obvious they were not trying to hit him as hard as they could, a couple of the times punches were forceful. As they ran him along the corridor, a couple of times he fell and they dragged him through the dirt. The floor outside the cells is dirt. Rahman did acquire a number of abrasions on his face, legs, and hands, but nothing that required medical attention. This may account for the abrasions found on Rahman's body after his death. Rahman had a number of surface abrasions on his shoulders, pelvis, arms, leg, and face. At this point, Rahman was returned to his cell and secured. Dunbar stated that CIA Officer 1, the CIA officer in charge of detention site Cobalt, may have spoken to Rahman for a few minutes, but he did not know what CIA Officer 1 said. Dunbar stated that after something like this is done, interrogators should speak to the prisoner to give them something to think about. Okay. Yeah, I was just wanting to see what they were talking about with the mock, what do you call them? Now I can't even think the word. The mock executions. Okay. Okay, so let's go on. So in January of 2003, CIA Inspector General John Helgerson began a formal review of the death of Gul Rahman and began a separate review of the entire CIA detention and interrogation program. The resulting special review of counterterrorism, detention, and interrogation activities, a special review, found that there were no guidelines for the use of the CIA's enhanced interrogation techniques at detention site Cobalt prior to December 2002, and that interrogators, some with little or no training, were left to their own devices in working with detainees. I just had to stop and say one more thing I was thinking about. I realize these people are human, every single one of them, even if they are terrorists. We are a nation of laws, and I feel like some of this stuff was a bit too harsh, and I know they were in other countries where if those people had the chance, like the terrorist types, they would kill you. They would stone you. They would throw you off of buildings. They would do all these harmful things to you. So I get the two sides, like I said, of the coin. I don't know how anybody else feels about it. I just know that I'm not really necessarily taking a side because I get it. If they had the opportunity, they'd kill us. We are still a nation of laws, and we're supposed to abide by that. And that's kind of why America's what it is, because we're not out here trying to harm other people necessarily. That it does happen. I know that in other countries, yes, and some interference, stuff like that. I get that. But anyway, just had to say that because I didn't want it to leave it like out in the open. Yes, we should have empathy, but at the same time, if they had the opportunity, they'd kill us, just because we don't believe in what they believe in, if they're the extremist type. But anyway, let's just go on. So the Inspector General's special review also revealed the lack of oversight of detention site Cobalt by CIA leadership. DCI Tenet stated that he was not very familiar, and he's a counterintelligence director, that he was not very familiar with detention site Cobalt and what the CIA is doing with medium value targets. Associate Deputy Director of Operations, redacted, stated that he was unaware that the CIA's enhanced interrogation techniques were being used there. In August 2003, CIA General Counsel Scott Mueller relayed that he was under the impression that detention site Cobalt was only a holding facility and he had no idea who was responsible for Cobalt. Senior Deputy General Counsel John Rizzo informed the OIG that he knew little about detention site Cobalt and that his focus was on detention site Green and detention site Blue. CTC Chief of Operations, redacted, stated that he had much less knowledge of operations at detention site Cobalt and that the CIA's Green and Blue detention sites were much more important to him. Finally, Chief of CTC Jose Rodriguez stated he did not focus on detention site Cobalt because he had other higher priorities. And the CIA begins training new interrogators, interrogation techniques not reviewed by the Department of Justice included in the training syllabus. What could go wrong, right? Okay, the CIA CTC renditions group began preparing for the first CIA interrogator training course in August of 2002, during the period of which Abu Zubaydah was being interrogated using the CIA's interrogation or enhanced interrogations technique at detention site Green. The CIA's chief of interrogations and redacted, the CIA officer with OTS who has spent blank years as a SERE instructor with JPRA, led the interrogation training. The first interrogation training conducted with the assistance of JPRA personnel occurred from November 12th, 2002 to November 18th, 2002. The class included 8 students who were seeking to become CIA interrogators and 3 students seeking to support the CIA interrogation process. The CIA training program involved 65 hours of instruction and training on the CIA's enhanced interrogation techniques, including at least 2 interrogation techniques whose legality has not been evaluated by the Department of Justice: the abdominal slap and the finger press. Although a number of personnel at CIA headquarters reviewed the training materials, there are no CIA records of any CIA officer raising objections to the techniques being included in the syllabus. Despite recommendations from CIA attorneys, the CIA fails to adequately screen potential interrogators in 2002 and 2003. On November 2002, after the completion of the first formal training, redacted, CTC legal, redacted, and CTC attorney redacted to make it known that from now on, CTC and legal, must vet all personnel who are enrolled in, observing, or teaching, or otherwise associated with the class. Redacted added, moreover, we will be forced to disapprove the participation of specific personnel in the use of enhanced interrogation or enhanced techniques unless we have ourselves vetted them and are satisfied with their qualifications and suitability for what are clearly unusual measures that are lawful only when practiced correctly by personnel whose records clearly demonstrate their suitability for that role. The vetting process will not be that dissimilar from the checks that are provided by the OIG, the OS, etc. In certain cases, before individuals are promoted or receive awards, and the selection and training of aggressive interrogators certainly warrants a similar vetting process. The chief of CTC, Jose Rodriguez, objected to this approach, stating, "I do not think that CTC or legal should or would want to give into the business of vetting participants, observers, instructors, or others that are involved in this program. It is simply not their job. Your job is to tell all what are the acceptable legal standards for conducting interrogations per the authorities obtained from justice and agreed upon by the White House." Contrary to statements later made by CIA Director Michael Hayden and other CIA officials that all those involved in the questioning of detainees are carefully chosen and screened for demonstrated professional judgments and maturity, CIA records suggest that the vetting sought by redacted did not take place. The committee reviewed CIA records related to several CIA officers and contractors involved in the CIA's detention and interrogation program, most of whom conducted interrogations. The committee identified a number of personnel whose background include notable derogatory information, calling into question their eligibility for employment, their access to classified information, and their participation in CIA interrogation activities. In nearly all cases, the derogatory information was known to the CIA prior to the assignment for the CIA officers to the detention and interrogation program. This group of officers included individuals who, among other issues, had engaged in appropriate detainee interrogation, had workplace anger management issues, and had reportedly admitted to sexual assault. Wow. So the Bureau of Prisons wowed by level of deprivation at CIA's Cobalt Detention Center site. In December 2002, the CIA's rendition group sent a team of recently trained interrogators to detention site Cobalt to engage in interrogations. The interrogation plans proposed by that team for at least 3 detainees at detention site Cobalt included the use of interrupted sleep, loud music, and reduction in food quality and quantity. Less than a month after the death of Gul Rahman from suspected hypothermia, the plans also called for detainees' clothes to be removed in a facility that was described to be 45 degrees Fahrenheit. CIA headquarters approved the proposals for these detainees, whom CIA described as medium value. Prior to this, in November 2002, a delegation of several officers from the Federal Bureau of Prisons conducted an assessment of detention site Cobalt. Following the November redacted 2002 through November 2002 visit, CIA officers in country remarked that the Federal Bureau of Prisons assessments, along with recommendations and training, had made a noticeable improvement on how the day-to-day operations in the facility are performed and made the detention site a more secure and safer working environment for redacted officers. On December 4th, 2002, officers at CIA headquarters met with individuals from the Federal Bureau of Prisons to learn more about their inspection of detention site Cobalt and their training of redacted security staff. During that meeting, the Federal Bureau of Prisons personnel described detention site Cobalt and stated that there was absolutely no talking inside the facility, that the guards do not interact with the prisoners, and that everything is done in silence and in the dark. According to a CIA officer, the Federal Bureau of Prison staff also commented that they were wowed at first by the facility because They have never been in a facility where individuals are so sensory deprived, i.e., constant white noise, no talking, everyone in the dark with the guards wearing a lot on their head. When they collected and escorted a detainee to an interrogation cell, detainees constantly being shackled to the wall or floor, and the starkness of each cell, concrete and bars. There's nothing like this in the Federal Bureau of Prisons. They then explained that they understood the mission and it was their collective assessment that in spite of all this sensory deprivation, the detainees were not being treated inhumanely. I don't see how. But anyway, so I know it's not supposed to be a resort, but good grief. I don't know. They explained that the facility was sanitary, there was medical care, and the guard force and staff did not mistreat the detainees. By the end of December 2002, the CIA Renicious group that had visited detention site Cobalt had concluded that the detention facility initial baseline conditions involved so much deprivation that any further deprivation would have limited impact on the interrogations. The team thus recommended that experts and authorities, other than the individuals who crafted the process, review the interrogation process and conditions, and that a legal review be conducted. CIA headquarters does not appear to have taken action on these recommendations. The CIA places CIA detainees in country facilities because they did not meet the MON standard for detention. In the spring of 2003, the CIA continued to hold detainees at facility in country who are known not to meet the MON standard for detention. CIA officer one described the arrangement he had with country officers in an email. Redacted, they also happen to have 3 or 4 rooms where they can lock up people discreetly. Give them a few $100 a month and they use the rooms for whoever I bring over, no questions asked. It is very useful for housing guys that shouldn't be in detention site Cobalt for one reason or another, but still need to be kept isolated and held in secret detention. CIA cables indicate that CIA officers transfer at least 4 detainees to these country facilities because they did not meet the standard for CIA detention under the MON. In total, 4 CIA detention facilities were established in country, and CIA records indicate that detention site Cobalt held a total of 64 detainees during the period of its operation between September 2002 and 2004, while detention site Gray held 8 detainees between redacted 2003 and redacted 2003. The CIA later established 2 other CIA facilities in country, detention site Orange, which held 34 detainees between, I don't know why those are redacted, 2004 and 2006, and detention site Brown, which held 12 detainees between 2006 and 2008. All right, I'm going to stop it right here. This is a pretty good place to stop. I don't know. But I will talk to y'all later. This kind of interesting information coming out of the CIA and the Senate. But anyway, talk to y'all later. Bye.